Hello everyone, thank you for joining Ranger 4's webcast, What is a DevOps Engineer? Here to facilitate the discussion this afternoon is Ranger 4's Helen Beale and Ryan Dobson. As mentioned earlier, please write any questions you may have in the chat box or use the question function in your GoToWebinar control panel, and they'll be answered at the end. I will now pass it over to Helen.
Thank you very much, Priyanka, and hello everybody. Good afternoon, good morning to wherever you are. As Priyanka said, I'm Helen Beale. I am a DevOpsologist here at Range 4, and today I'm accompanied by a fellow DevOpsologist, Ryan Dobson.
Hello all.
Ryan joined us quite a while ago now, but before Ryan joined us to be a DevOpsologist at Range 4, Ryan specialised in placing DevOps engineers, so he makes an ideal person to be having this discussion today. So we are going to be exploring what is a DevOps engineer. So first off, I'm kind of concerned that we shouldn't have DevOps Engineer as a job title. In DevOps, we don't particularly like job titles, and there's an argument that says we might be creating a rod for our own backs, and we'll probably explain in more detail why that is by having this as a job title. But as you've seen this slide build in front of you, you'll have seen that there are a lot of examples of DevOps engineers out there and in a wide variety of different companies. So this is just, I just did a search on LinkedIn, and you can see I've found ones at Reed Elsevier and Sky, very large companies, and then it's kind of smaller, more web-centric, startup-y type companies like Not on the High Street.com and Kahoo and places like that. In your experience, Ryan, were DevOps engineers primarily starting in the sort of what we term the unicorns often in this place, or I know you did a lot of work with retailers like Sainsbury's. Is there a pattern in the kind of people that are hiring this job title?
Yeah, so I'd see it from sort of two different angles really. I think obviously there's the companies that are moving into DevOps that are looking to obviously hire these sort of new whiz kids on the block as such, and also from the sort of candidate and engineer sort of point of view, it's having DevOps in their job title also sort of builds up their reputation as such. It sort of puts them out there, makes them more accessible for both companies and recruiters both. From my experience, DevOps engineers tend to come from more of an ops and sysadmin background, as I think we'll see in a later slide. But yeah, I think it's more of a, because it was a buzzword originally, and still is in some sort of sense, it adds a bit of profile to these guys, I think, in terms of finding new roles.
And it is an interesting point that you make about it being a buzzword. You know, it did start as the Twitter hashtag. We work with lots of organisations that are doing DevOps in many different ways, even though they might not be calling that. We meet lots of people that say, I've been trying to do this for 15 or 20 years. I make the IT teams work closer together and more effectively with the business. So I think we have to kind of bear that in mind when people put it in their job title. But as you say, let's drill down a little bit more in the kind of things that, or the kind of skill sets that we're seeing when people are claiming to be a DevOps engineer. And let's talk about this for a minute as well, because you and I sometimes try and make a distinction between a DevOps engineer and a DevOps consultant.
Yes.
Interestingly, Jade, in this particular email, has crossed the terms. So where do you think the lines are on?
Yeah, very good sort of tactic from Jade there, I think. So I think an engineer, I do think there's two different clear distinctions. I believe DevOps engineer would be more of a hands-on technical person that can use the likes of that's mentioned, AWS, Chef, Puppet, all the typical DevOps tools as you sort of list there. And I think the difference between that and a DevOps consultant, I think a DevOps consultant in my eyes is a little bit more senior in the terms of has much more collaboration with the business, can lead people and coach people in the DevOps practices and methodologies, and not necessarily just hands-on, if any hands-on, I think.
I'd agree with that, and I think this is a fairly typical skill set, and we'll have a look at a couple more in a minute. But you know, some cloud stuff, some orchestration stuff, some continuous integration things, some experience in developing deployment pipelines. This is what the box people tend to put DevOps engineers in, and this is kind of one of the problems that I've got with it, because DevOps is not just about automation. So this is a little bit dangerous for me, because it's kind of, there's a temptation that a company might go, well, we've built our DevOps team, we've got some DevOps engineers, and we've done some DevOps, whereas in fact all they've done is build a bit of tool chain.
Indeed, yeah, and obviously, Helen, with all your experience, you'd see obviously companies that do build the tool chain and then still get stuck in terms of their DevOps sort of moving forward. You know, they've got their automation tool set, but without the teams collaborating together in such a way, are they getting the most from their tool chains? I mean, like, what is it like in your experience?
Absolutely right. It's a really common pattern. So we get a lot of companies that want to engage with us because they've built a bit of a tool chain, either in one department or often with larger enterprises. A few people have tried to do it and used maybe different variations, you know, a bit of Azure, a bit of AWS, a bit of Chef, or a bit of Puppet, or a bit of Ansible, a bit of Jenkins, or a bit of Bamboo, or a bit of, you know, Team City. There are lots of tools in this space, but they're finding it really hard to consume that tool. So yep. The proliferation of the DevOps principles and the ways of working aren't being spread across the organisation.
Yeah, and I think this, so just coming to mind, one of the large sort of enterprise companies that I actually recruited for back in the day and built up a team, I think one of the mistakes they made was they siloed a DevOps team, and they still had the consultants that could bob in between teams, and I think that was the role of the DevOps engineers as well, is to bob in between the different development and infrastructure teams. But if they want anything automation based, was always finger pointed to them, always put on their shoulders as sort of their responsibility. And I think that's obviously one of the things we're trying to move away from in DevOps, is the finger pointing and
the constraints and the bottlenecks, and we see this a lot. I mean, you'll know one of the insurance customers we have that's over in the walkie-talkie building. They and another data scientist organisation that we work with in Ealing, both of them had an experience where they gave somebody a DevOps job title, and what they really wanted was an evangelist that was going to push DevOps thinking and principles through the organisation, and what they ended up with was a person that everyone would come to do a bit of automation on a database, or basically low-level technical tasks.
Yeah, exactly that. And I think coming back to the recruitment point of view, it's always quite difficult to sort of understand a hiring manager's point of view. You know, the company understands DevOps. They think, okay, we want to move into this new way of work and this whole, you know, this new DevOps nirvana that everyone keeps speaking of. But do they want a change manager? Do they need somebody that's going to lead that change in what I would call a DevOps consultant, or do they need a couple of guys that can come in, or girls that can come in and build up an automation pipeline? You know, I think it's two quite different things.
Definitely, and I kind of link that and refer back to the point you made early on in the discussion about typically seeing DevOps engineers coming out of the ops space, and in particular the sysadmin space. So it's almost like you're a sysadmin, and then you do a bit of scripting or a bit of automation, and then you earn the right to put DevOps on your CV. Whereas DevOps, as we know, you'll know the CALMS acronym, culture, automation is one of them, but also lean and metrics and sharing. So I feel it's dangerous just to...
Yeah, it can be dangerous, and this is one of the things that I think a lot of mistakes engineers made, especially when I was recruited, is guys coming from a sysadmin background, they maybe touched on a bit of Chef, maybe a little bit of Ansible in their past role, and now they called themselves DevOps engineers and demanded a higher daily rate.
I think we can understand why people would do that. We'll come to some stats on that in a little bit.
Yeah, definitely, and but yeah, it was funny, but yeah, sorry, moving on.
Yeah, and you know, this is just an example of another CV or another background of somebody that calls themselves a DevOps engineer, or in fact a senior DevOps consultant. So this one, I think, shows that line that Ryan's been describing, and you can still see that we're seeing tools like Jenkins and Chef and Docker and EC2 and, you know, AWS CloudFormation being mentioned there, and CI and CD. However, what we're also seeing is this particular person has a background in being a technical architect. So actually they're going to have a broader view around the business, but they're still not talking about making cultural change, managing leadership, metrics, you know, streamlining operations, that sort of thing.
Yeah, and I think this comes back to the whole difference between a DevOps engineer and a DevOps consultant. You can argue that a top-end, you know, high quality, sort of worth his weight DevOps engineer would also necessarily be an architect as well, because it does take some sort of organisation and some creating of, you know, as I said, building automation pipelines. So that comes in from a technical aspect, but then you have the consultant point of view that you need to be able to coach and lead and mentor and so on. So yeah, I think we've got some good stats in terms of the hiring skill set here.
So talk us through this IT Jobs Watch profile here and what we're seeing here.
So this looks typical. So this is very typical, coming back to CVs that I used to go through, and sort of requirements that used to come from hiring managers. So as you can see, I mean, like DevOps there being the top
Unsurprisingly, perhaps.
skill set. Yeah,
So
but
this is IT Jobs Watch have actually taken a load of CVs and counted the times these terms come up with this particular job title in a CV.
yeah, and I used to obviously help a lot of engineers write their CVs when I was doing it, and I would always make the recommendation to put in as many highly sought after words in their CV as possible. Now,
Assuming they have the skill set.
assuming they have the skill set. So for those of you out there that are looking to get a job, basically it's worth noting that the more words you have in your CV, the closer to the top of a recruiter's search you would come. So this is where I can see why this has happened. But it's funny to see, because you have all these technical skills, but is DevOps a technical skill, or is it the aspect of all of these? What do you think?
I don't think DevOps is a technical skill, but I think these people will be saying it is. But what I find interesting on this is that we've got, at number 10, we've got continuous integration, but nowhere in the top 29 do we see continuous delivery or continuous deployment. Nowhere in this top list do we see anything around Lean or Kanban or Jira or all of the things that help us hang a tool chain together. I think probably Daniel's on the call, and he's probably shouting at his computer now, where is ITSM or ITIL? You know, where is the skills around actually delivering IT as a service?
Yeah, and I think this just goes to show that it's you know, a lot of engineers out there that use these typical tools are obviously making themselves DevOps engineer, whereas the DevOps consultant point of view, with the coaching and management style, are sort of missing from this list. As you said, Lean, ITSM, and so on. So yeah, it is interesting.
That one really stands out for me as well. Sorry for people on the call, you can't see what I'm pointing at, but I'm pointing at number 28, which is finance, which stands out to me like a sore thumb on there. And we have a lot of conversations with people that are transforming on their DevOps journey about things like continuous funding. So if people are starting to deliver software in an agile manner, you don't really want a waterfall budget process stood behind it. But the last people I would have thought that would have been concerned with or have any influence over that budgetary cycle would have been the people I classify as DevOps engineers.
Yeah, definitely, and I would probably look at that from a different point of view, actually. I think that word probably pops up because they'd worked in the finance industry.
Oh, okay.
But to be honest, I think, especially from Ranger 4's point of view and the customers that we're working with, I think that word will probably creep higher towards the top over the next few months and years. Just obviously the higher amount of financial organisations moving into the whole DevOps industry.
And it is a massive industry in this country, and quite a small one. I think people tend to move around and around in it, don't they?
Mm-hmm.
Let's have a look at this one. What are we looking at here?
So this looks like to be the areas that DevOps is more widely associated with and the higher salaries. So yeah, obviously, as you can see, I think England is I don't think that should be at the top, seeing as everything underneath is, well, apart from Scotland.
I guess it gives you a country average, doesn't it?
Yeah, and it does, and it is clear to see, you know, London's obviously leading the way in terms of technology, as you'd probably expect, and then obviously the surrounding boroughs, South East, Berkshire. Surprising Yorkshire's up there.
I guess that's probably Leeds and Bradford and places like that have some really big financial companies, some Lloyds and Provident Financial, and quite fairly sizable companies up there.
Yeah, yeah.
I think one of the things that I kind of find interesting here, and we might be able to answer this in a minute, but in terms of the salary scale, it's quite wide there, and it's kind of, the question is really like, what's the premium of putting DevOps on your CV over sysadmin or technical architect?
Very high, I can tell you from experience.
So this might give us a bit of a clue maybe into that. I mean, I was going to put a Google Trends graph in that I use a lot to show the DevOps engineer kind of prevalence as a title, but you can see in the top chart here how it's lifted off since 2011, and it's, 2.5% of job ads that feature DevOps engineer in the job title as contractors, and another 1.5% as permanent. So that is 4%
Yeah.
of IT jobs.
And I don't know about you, Helen, but I think this has probably come from the increased need of companies wanting to go into DevOps, and they realise there's a need to go into DevOps, and probably jumping the gun and hiring a DevOps engineers and paying them what they want.
Yeah. I'm interested about this dip. I'm wondering if that's a referendum dip.
Possibly. When was that? May?
Oh yeah, it's just in the second half of the year. I mean, there have been other slumps. I think there's another thing that is really noticeable for me here, which is almost twice as many DevOps engineer jobs are for contractors. And what does that tell us as a story?
That one, there's a very high chance that if you're a contractor, you're going to earn more money. But also, I think it's the role of a DevOps engineer. You know, speaking to guys that I used to work with, these certain engineers, they didn't want to go to one certain company and be a DevOps engineer. From their point of view, they go in, they set up an automation pipeline, and in essence, automate themselves out of the job. So I mean, I don't know from your point of view, Helen, is there a need for a permanent DevOps engineer?
Yeah, I mean, this automating yourself out of the job, I guess there's still more stuff that you can do, right? There's applications to be re-architected and microservices to consider and containerization and more. Maybe this is one of the reasons that people are finding it so difficult to consume the tool chain, is because someone automates a bit, but they don't go through the transitional strategy of bringing all the applications on board.
Yeah, definitely, and I think it's probably a mix of both. Sort of the workers as such is, you know, seeking these highly paid jobs and highly sought after contracts, but also maybe a lack of understanding from the business point of view as well. You know, they do in fact need a person on site that can work across all areas of the business and not just on one application or, you know, one pipeline, and move on. So yeah, maybe.
So, and we're sort of going back to our first point, really, aren't we? That DevOps isn't just about creating a pipeline, it's about principles of working that need to be spread across the whole organisation. And we do often come across organisations that have hired a few contractors that have left and DevOps hasn't got off the ground. And I think that's endemic in the way that DevOps has evolved as a grassroots movement that then needs top-down support. It needs to be seen as a strategic change programme.
Yeah, and just speaking from experience again, I mean, I used to speak to a lot of frustrated engineers. They'd be hired in to make this change and make this sort of progression that the business is looking for, but because of the lack of management and senior management support, what they're trying to, it doesn't necessarily happen. So yeah, a bit of frustration from both ends, I think.
Yeah. So this one here, this is giving us a little bit of a clue as to what's going on with the salary increases, I think. I mean, they're flattish in some respects, but if you take the median salary, that goes up quite considerably. Considering post-recession, I don't think there are many job roles in the country that have experienced that kind of 10% uplift over that time. What doesn't tell us is what I'd really like to know is where the sysadmin versus DevOps engineer salaries sit.
I can imagine the amount of sysadmins that still stick to their guns and call them sysadmins has dwindled very, very
rapidly.
Well, rapidly.
So that 4% of IT jobs that are DevOps engineers, that's the 4% that were sysadmins.
I believe so, yeah.
So this is from a Puppet report about DevOps salaries that came out quite recently. That we will endeavour to attach or link to in your follow-up email. What patterns do you see on here that are interesting, do you think?
This
is the one here, isn't it? Look, this is what we just talked about. This isn't UK, but it's US. But the top left chart is the sysadmin and the top right is the DevOps engineer. So if you've got the 2% earning over $150,000 versus 9,
yeah.
10 versus 16, the 22 versus 36, and there is quite a trend over that way. And you've got 0% at the 0 to 25 and 25 to 34.
Well, I think this goes to show that to be classed as a DevOps engineer, if you're going to call yourself that, you need to have that level of experience. You know, I kind of get surprised sometimes when I come across people that are junior DevOps engineers. You know, I can understand learning all these different skills and rolling them into one, but surely you need to be a master in some areas. Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah, DevOps does talk about cross-skilling and things, but yeah, we can't be a master of all, can we?
No, not at all.
Specialise in some area. Although, interestingly, I always think of an architect as a very kind of umbrella role that understands lots and lots of different concepts and how they fit together, that doesn't necessarily get down and dirty with the coding and things. And I'm wondering now, looking at this, if I was a DevOps architect, what I could expect my earnings to be. If you look, they've got like the leaning end on this chart.
Hopefully you could add them all together and make your own salary, architect and DevOps.
So this is a statement we hear a lot in the DevOps world, and we've alluded or said this even explicitly already in this session. And you kind of have to wonder why DevOps is not a job title, and we prefer it to be a role. And there's a couple of reasons for that, again, which we've alluded to already, but I'm just going to clarify them here. The problem with having DevOps as a job title is it's about flexibility. So this is why we like roles, because roles allow you to carry more than one role at once and swap roles around. Often if you've got a job title, people act quite restrictively in that, and you end up with situations where people go, no, that's not my job, I can't do that, or feel that they haven't got the autonomy or mastery to be able to move around and participate in agile and DevOps ways of self-organizing teams. So it can really be really detrimental to that ability to choose the work you do and distribute authority and move some people around. The other reason that we really don't like it is because we believe that DevOps is for everybody. It should proliferate across the IT and the business. It is about principles of working. It's about everybody understanding how to get the business closer to the customer and contracting that flow to the smallest amount so that the feedback loops are amplified. And if we start doing things like calling people DevOps or calling teams DevOps, we're creating other silos and we're restricting other people's access to the DevOps movement and journey.
Yeah, so I'm still a little bit conflicted on this, if I'm totally honest. So I believe at the moment, I think there still is not a need for DevOps engineer, but I can understand why people will call them engineers, because it is still a bit of a buzzword. As I mentioned earlier, that I think it encourages people to be found a little bit more. But in terms of the overall job title with DevOps, again, I believe at the moment you can necessarily have DevOps in your title, but are you a DevOps architect? Do you have the architect's skills? Are you an engineer, or are you an automation engineer? Are you a DevOps consultant? You know, I think it's still quite prevalent now.
Well, yeah, I might not like it, but I certainly can't control it because there's a lot of DevOps engineers out there. I think, you know, I can be very purist about it. It's absolutely true. I particularly don't like the DevOps team thing because it is really dangerous that people think they've done it, and it is really restrictive. But I have seen a few organisations actually use it very successfully as a jumping off point or a transitional strategy where they create a group of evangelists and then they push the thinking and principles further out the organisation.
Yeah, and that I would very much agree with. You know, it's a starting point and not somewhere that you should stay on. We're going to touch on in a bit sort of what the future looks like for them, and yeah, we can dive into that a little bit more then.
Yeah, I really enjoyed this blog. You can see the URL in the top of the screen. But you know, this is from somebody that has actually lived and not enjoyed having a DevOps job role. And you know, we've made a distinction already between DevOps engineer and DevOps consultant and DevOps architect. But we're also getting to the point where we're starting to see director DevOps, and I've actually carried the title DevOps director here, but that was more about directing the particular DevOps part of our business. But this is a really good read, and you know, Pete's very open with his thinking and speaks at lots of events. But this really kind of triggered, when I read his blog, it triggered me back to this slide here. So this is a slide from a presentation I did at the back end of June at the DevOps Enterprise Summit with Lego, one of our customers. And this is actually Lego talking about, well, the presentation we did was about correlations between DevOps and holacracy, and one of the correlations between the two movements is the dislike for job titles. And we and Soren talked about this, and he came up with, well, we came up with this diagram that they'd had all of these job titles. And over time, as people had started to cross-skill and started to self-organise their teams, these job titles have become less important, and they'd started to refer to themselves all as continuous delivery engineers. We'll come back to what we think the future is, because I think Ryan and I, again, are just slightly have slightly differing opinions, which is obviously very healthy, on that job title. But that's the real-life example from one customer who's moved their thinking. Steve Williams at Ticketmaster, I went to see him for a sort of general DevOps chat a few weeks ago, and he actually made a statement in the meeting which I found really interesting when we were discussing this, and I kind of said, can I quote you on that? And his opinion is that, you know, it shouldn't be in people's job titles, and he won't see anybody with it. For all of the reasons that we just described, is that it's not, in some respects, a real thing to have in your job title. You're basically saying you're an automation engineer.
Yep.
And this is from Pete's blog, and really reiterates the point that I've been trying to make, that if DevOps fails, it should be a failure of the entire company. And it's Ryan's kind of highlighted this as well, in that there is a propensity or a danger that if you have DevOps people or a DevOps team, and there is a problem with something, that the thing at them. But I see so many examples with organisations where the DevOps team have done a great job at building automation or being agile and starting to develop iteratively, but it's somebody in the business that doesn't understand why they should release iteratively, because they think customers can't take releases in big chunks, or they've got a whole team of people that have been hired and trained to train the customer to consume new releases. So it really is much bigger than a few people doing bits and bobs with Chef and AWS.
Yeah, and it sometimes, I think, puts off other engineers in the company, you know, whether they come from infrastructure or DevOps. It's sort of these new kids on the block and what they're doing on our turf sort of mentality, I think, sometimes.
Yeah. And just to kind of reiterate my point, so there's a couple of slides coming up. This is one of them from a presentation I developed last year, which was really about how organisational change happens when DevOps is proliferates or is consumed. So this is a few slides in, and what you can see is we've got the grassroots movement. So we've got a few of the little green bods that have started to switch on to the DevOps thinking. The head of development has started to think about it, so we've got a bit of top-down sponsorship and some budget to spend on whether that's tooling or additional resources or training or coaching and consultancy to help that move forward. We've got the business now looking into IT. So there's been a few developments, but for DevOps to really get there, we've talked about this already. So the DevOps team anti-pattern, this is something that some people do. What you can also see here is there's been a movement. So in the previous slide, you'll remember there were silos, two big silos, Dev and Ops, and then little silos within them of BA, Dev, DBs, and Test. And then what we've done here is what people often do in the first step of Agile. So they have got product-centric teams, or Scrum teams, or squads, or whatever language you prefer to use. And the little red bods have come in from the business, and they're our product owners. And I've put them in red because often I find them a bit of a blockage because they don't really understand what IT are doing and don't really understand the challenges around iterative development. And there are lots of tools that we have that can help with that. The Phoenix Project game, that we've been running for a few months now, is a really effective way of tackling this use case and getting the lights switched on in the business. And then kind of skipping a few slides of the evolution forward again, this is what we see as DevOps Nirvana. So you can see everyone is thinking about DevOps. Everyone understands how to collaborate better, how to be more transparent, how to self-organize, how to sense tension and amplify a feedback loop. At, I think it was DevOps Days earlier on in the year, Joanne Molsky, one of the co-authors with Jess Humble of the Lean Enterprise, was on stage, and she was talking about how a few years ago we would talk about IT aligning with the business, then we talked about IT integrating with the business, and now we're really in a situation where IT is the business. With the increasing digitisation and the way that consumers are using technology now, if the business is to survive, thrive even, then it has to really engage its IT capabilities. You can see we've flattened a lot of the hierarchy here as well. So we've got customer innovation management, and that's another DevOps thing, is about pushing and distributing authority around. And then another common pattern that we see, particularly in larger enterprises, is pockets and pockets of tooling popping up in lots of different places. So there are counter documents to standardizing tools. Some people think that each area should be able to have their own tool set that suits them best. But there are definitely license advantages and skills advantages and flexibility advantages around having some tools standardization. So this is our big question that we're trying to answer. So Ryan, what does a DevOps engineer look like in 3 years?
Oh,
I liked your 7 foot tall answer, by the way.
7 foot tall, three arms and 27 fingers. So like I mentioned or touched on a little bit earlier, I think at the moment there is a little bit of a need to have the title of a DevOps engineer because it is new, it is a new position, it is a bit of a buzzword, and both the engineers need to be recognised, but also the business are looking for these people to drive the business forward. Now, is that going to be the same case in 3 years' time? I don't think so. I think, as you mentioned, we're all going to be continuous delivery engineers, that everyone should be focusing in towards the end goal, and more fluidity in people's roles than there is now.
3 years sounds like a long way away, and 2019 sounds like a long way away, but we've only really been like 6 years into this journey from a Twitter hashtag to here, sort of now. So, I'm torn about how far we'll have got. I'm not as comfortable with CD or continuous delivery engineers as you are as a term. I'm sure I heard somebody, and if anybody else on the call has ever heard this, I did put a shout out on Twitter a few weeks ago, but I'm sure I heard a fairly senior kind of DevOps Illuminati say one day we'll all be engineers, which I thought was really quite lovely, quite ambitious, but yeah, I mean, DevOps and holacracy don't really like job titles. Will we evolve that much in 3 years that we really can understand and share roles around an organisation effectively? I'm not sure.
So let's ask you the same question then. What put bluntly, is there going to be any DevOps engineers in 3 years?
I don't know, and it probably is worth us going back to our DevOps Friday 5 initiative, because I can't remember if it was this year or last year, but we did definitely ask the question, what does DevOps look like in 2020? And a lot of people would say, well, it's DevOps done, everyone will be doing it and living it then, so it won't be in the same way that e-business is no longer a term. E-business was a massive buzzword 15 years ago, but everyone does e-business now. If you don't do e-business, you're not in business, and that's what DevOps feels like as well. And I say this often when we engage with customers and do things like assessments and workshops, and people are genuinely nervous about whether they're doing the right things or whether they've missed something really important. And often people find, as I said right at the start of this call, that they are doing elements of DevOps already, whether it's building a bit of pipeline or addressing their culture or trying to tackle their value streams or pin down their requirements management or do automated testing. They're all elements of a DevOps journey. So, yeah, perhaps the DevOps engineer won't exist as a job title in 3 years. Who knows? So we were wondering what to suggest you do next after this particular webcast, as it was a bit of a chat about trends in the market. But we do have another webcast coming up in a month or so's time, which is Don't Hire, Grow Your Own, which is some advice on how to avoid slipping into the trap of asking for lots of CVs of DevOps engineers, because you don't just want the technical skills, you want people that understand your business and fit your business, and you may have lots of talent already that you can reuse and evolve and hang on to. It's very expensive hiring people, particularly contractors. So we'll send a joining up link in the follow-up email to this, and maybe see you there too. But that brings us to the end of our content from today. So let's have a look. I think I can see that a couple of questions have come through. So if Prank is all right with me just looking them up myself, I shall do that. So Daniel has asked what happens if you have Agile and DevOps on your CV. The moon blows up.
The moon blows up, yeah. Agile and DevOps. Are they not the same thing? Is DevOps not an evolution of Agile?
Yeah, I mean, we could go back to the CVs, but it'd be a bit painful flicking through all the slides, but I'm sure we do get. So we made a sweeping statement perhaps earlier that most DevOps engineers come from the sysadmin background. Actually, I don't think that's a sweeping statement. I think that's fair enough.
Yeah.
We see more DevOps engineers come from sysadmin than we do from development.
Yes,
side.
I would say so. And I think it's the argue as well, you know, DevOps is an evolution of Agile, or DevOps is the harmonious polygamous marriage of Agile ITSM and Lean.
Yeah.
So
I would feel happier if I saw a DevOps engineer with Agile and ITSM and Lean and Kanban
but
on their CV.
I would get worried if they didn't have Agile on their CV and just had DevOps.
Yeah. Battle says the true DevOps way would be not to have a job title, but the recruitment market is not mature enough to deal with that at the moment. So how can I sell myself if I'm looking for another job?
So this, I'd like to answer that. So that's my argument at the moment, and this is why I think you should have DevOps in your job title for the time being, because it is such a recruitment-driven market out there. As much as people like them or loathe them, you know, recruitment drives the industry and moves a lot of people around positions. So there are good recruiters out there that understand the difference between an automation engineer and a sysadmin. But for the time being, I think it's definitely worth having DevOps in your job title.
Yeah, and my advice, I think, is in terms of selling yourself or differentiate yourself, and actually Daniel kind of answered it in his question. If the majority of DevOps engineers in the market have CVs that are sysadmin plus Chef and Jenkins and AWS, then focus in on the Agile skills, the Lean skills, the ITSM skills. So the transformational movement capabilities, focus in on your leadership expertise and your softer skills. And that would be a lot more valuable, I think, to most organisations looking for that type of resource.
Yeah, definitely. And I also think it's worth saying as well, if you are looking for a new job and you know whether or not to put what in your job title, ask the recruiter, ask the hiring manager, what is it that they're looking for? You know, is it a DevOps engineer covers many areas, right? So just clear up what they're looking for, and you can add on that.
And Shivrajit says, can it not be named as DevOps engineer, architect, or manager, similar to what is named in development or ops background? So I think that's what's happening. Actually, I think people are naming at that level. And I think that's kind of what we have issue with, really, is that we don't think that's sustainable. And as Vassal said, the market, or the recruitment market, is a bit too immature to understand why that's important. But
I think you could just argue as well, just putting DevOps in front of another job title is just a new age version, right?
Yeah. And Shivrajit's second question is one for Daniel, but I'm not going to unmute him and make him answer it today, but it's also one for at least another half-hour webcast, which is how does ITSM fit into Lean or Agile DevOps world? So we refer often, actually, to DevOps as the harmonious polygamous marriage between ITSM, Lean and Agile. We believe that DevOps is a natural evolution of the convergence of those three maturing principles and methodologies. When we talk about Dev versus ops, what we see is people practicing agile development. So you have people developing and making software available to release in an iterative manner. And sometimes the operations teams are using ITSM or ITIL in a way that means their processes are a bit more waterfall and they're not moving at the same velocity. So we have a couple of courses. One is called the Agile Service Manager course. The next one is in October in London on October the 11th and 12th. The Agile Service Manager course is intended to help ops people understand how Agile works and get them to a place where they can deliver IT services in an Agile manner. The Agile Service Manager is basically the same role as a Scrum Master. The other course that we have is CAPO, the Certified Agile Process Owner, so the equivalent of a product owner in the Agile world. And again, it's helping the ops people move into this world. And Lean really, for me, sits across all of this. Lean is about getting waste out of the process and getting things to the customer faster. So we spend a lot of time during DevOps transformations doing various different levels of value stream mapping to help drive the DevOps transformation and help identify the constraints. Theory of constraints being a very important methodology that sits around and behind DevOps. So I think that's all the questions. I'm just going to quickly check the chat box, make sure I haven't missed anything. No, that is all of them. So I think it's time to say thank you for Priyanka for your introduction. Thank you, Ryan, for chatting with me today. And thank you to all of the participants for being with us.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you and goodbye.
Bye.